Hello to all participants of the T&R conference. I would like to present to you a paper entitled Epistemic and Deontic Modality, Complementing Semantic Tesserae, Creating Unified Messages Through Mosaic Texts. Now, before we get into the main argument which I want to make, I would like to explain a few things about the domain of modality, where we can distinguish two main subdomains, one relating to facts, expressing degrees of uncertainty, and another domain relating to events, expressing, amongst others, degrees of volition, but also degrees of obligation and permission. The former, the domain relating to degrees of certainty about facts, is called epistemic modality, but also other terms are used to designate that domain, for instance, modalization in systemic functional grammar. The other domain relating to events is sometimes called event modality or root modality or modulation in systemic functional grammar. And one main subdomain of that domain, which I want to focus on today, is the domain of deontic modality. Now, to illustrate those different terms which are used by different linguists, I would like to refer to this figure here, which includes the different subdomains of modality and the different terms. On this figure, you will also see on the right-hand side the concept of the evidentiality, which I will also mention. That concept is related to epistemic modality in the sense that evidence is provided for facts, but because this is a factual meaning and not a non-factual meaning, its modal status is sometimes disputed. But we will come back to that. Now, as you will see, I've used different colors to indicate the two subdomains. So green for root modality, including deontic modality, and red for epistemic modality. And one level on which these two meanings already work together to create different sides of one expression is that of the modal auxiliaries in English, where one form can express both an event modal meaning and an epistemic meaning. For instance, in "you must be John," we have the epistemic modal meaning, but "you must leave immediately" is a deontic event modal meaning. So that's a first level in which these two meanings work together. Now, epistemic modality, as I said, relates to facts and to knowledge and degrees of certainty about that knowledge. And in that sense, this can create a justification for readers or listeners so that the message which they receive becomes acceptable, so that they can actually receive a unified message which is rational for them to accept. The expressions of epistemic modality, which I include in my analyses, do not only include modal auxiliaries, but I take a broader systemic functional view, including also other terms such as or verbs, or words such as adverbs and other constructions, as you can see here. Deontic modality includes permission and obligation, or relates to permission and obligation, basically. And the term deontic actually refers to a source of authority, as is indicated by Lyons in his book on semantics. Different deontic meanings can also be expressed with different degrees of strength. And in that sense, an epistemic modal meaning can also modify a deontic modal meaning. For instance, you could say "you should leave now," but you can also say "I think you should leave now," so that in that sense you hedge the deontic meaning by means of the epistemic modal think. So it's interesting to see that on the level of the verbal group, there is also this mosaic of deontic and epistemic meanings working together, where the epistemic meaning modifies the non-epistemic modal meaning, but the opposite is not possible. The different expressions of deontic modality which are include, of course, modal auxiliaries, but also other constructions, such as, for instance, it's strictly forbidden to feed the ducks, as you can see here. Now, a first case which I want to look at in terms of how these modal meanings work together, co-create a unified message by means of other semantic meanings, is that where narrativity, the expression of narrativity related to epistemic modality, co-creates a unified message when it is complemented with expressions of concession. So I analyzed for the previous T&R conference, I analyzed chapter 17 of Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle, and in that text, I found very many expressions where these two meanings co-create one message, as you can see in the example here. For instance, considering the small size of these islands, we feel the more astonished at the number of their aboriginal beings and at their confined range. The concession actually creates the context for the reader. In terms of epistemic meanings, I noticed many examples in the same text, in the same chapter, where evidence is provided for the inferential epistemic modal meanings which are expressed. And in that way, evidence is presented for the reader, which makes it an acceptable message for the reader, so which creates a unified message for the reader, as you can see here, right? With respect to Chatham Island mouse, it should be borne in mind that it may possibly be an American species imported here, for I have seen in a most unfrequented part of the Pampas a native mouse living in the roof of a newly built hovel, and therefore its transportation in the vessel is not improbable. The last expression shows inferential epistemic modality, and for that evidence is presented, as you can see here. A second case which I wanted to comment on today is that, and that's my main case, is that where the epistemic and deontic modal meanings work together to create a unified mosaic text. And that relates to degrees of certainty in one type of text and to degrees of advice in another type of text. The first text type which I want to discuss is that of news articles which reported in 2020, last year, on the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a study by the Marteau, which I supervised. And there, as you can see here in the right-hand column, we saw that epistemic meanings, which were much more predominant than the deontic meanings, but we also saw that the deontic meanings resulted from the epistemic messages which were conveyed, as we will see from the following examples. So, for instance, an expression such as the following, almost certainly many tens of thousands of people are infected, that this expresses epistemic modality. But when we look at the next example, we equally have deontic modal expressions for public health advice. In this example, it's important that Londoners now pay special attention to what we're saying about non-essential contact, and to take particularly seriously the advice about working from home and avoiding confined spaces, such as pubs and restaurants. So there, for readers in these news articles, the epistemic modal messages support the public health advice conveyed by means of the deontic modality. The last case, which I want to report on after I will have wrapped up this first study, is that where we look at governmental travel advice. But first, going back to this previous study, so what we found in the news articles was that gradually there was greater certainty expressed by means of epistemic modality, and there was also a higher level of speaker or writer involvement, because more subjective modal expressions were found, and this actually formed the basis for increasing importance to appropriate and clear public health measures. I will come to the last case now, the main case that I want to discuss, and that is the case of governmental travel advice. So we find a few examples here, where again, the epistemic examples are indicated in red, and the deontic modal examples in green. As you can see from the second example, the epistemic cases actually support the advice given in the green items. So this example, to start with, What we did, I worked with a class of students, and we collected a corpus of 12,000 words with various texts from the different destinations that you see at the bottom here. And we looked at expressions of permission, advice, obligation, and imperative mood, also for obligation for the deontic level, and also at expressions of possibility, probability, and certainty for the epistemic level. But we also included for the latter the meaning of usuality, which is also part in systemic functional grammar of epistemic modality, because there also we see that one epistemic element supports the advice in the deontic element in green here. Right? So for instance, large crowds often gather in the main squares. In view of the current sanitary measures, these should be avoided. So the main findings here were, of course, that there were mainly deontic modal expressions, much more so than epistemic modal expressions, but that is logical, of course, because this is a text type of travel advice, as opposed to the text type of news reporting. But the main argument I wish to make here is that this coinciding of the epistemic deontic mosaic actually creates justification for the requested behavior in the deontic messages, so that creates a unified message for the readers, I think. So we have a few more examples here. So minefields are usually fenced and marked, but could be difficult to see, and that is the basis to say that people should not or cannot touch suspicious or unfamiliar objects. I also found an example where we have the epistemic modifying the modal element here, which we discussed earlier. So for instance, if you're not insured, you may have to pay many thousands of dollars upfront for medical care. In addition to the epistemic modal semantic relations, we also found that there are some semantic pragmatic shifts. So for instance, the expression of ability can actually be interpreted pragmatically with the meaning of advice, as we can see here in this example, or for instance, the expression of prediction and epistemic modal meaning can actually be interpreted pragmatically as prohibition, as we see in this example at the bottom here. So in terms of conclusions, to wrap up, I think there are different ways in which modal meanings form a mosaic text on the word form level, on the level of the verbal group, but also on the level of the text. In terms of word forms, we have the polysemy, the root epistemic polysemy, which is expressed in one and the same modal auxiliary, in English at least. We also saw that epistemic modals may modify root modal meanings in one verbal group. And then on the textual level, we saw that meanings of concession actually provide a context for expressions of narrativity, in this sense, creating a unified message for the reader. Also, evidentiality provides a basis for inferential epistemic meanings, as we have seen, to create a unified message for the readers. But most of all, I think it's important to see the way in which the epistemic and deontic modal meanings co-create one unified message, where the epistemic level provides the basis of a justification for the deontic level. So if people know the degree of certainty about, for instance, COVID-19, the knowledge on COVID-19, then this may be a justification for requested behavior. And in that sense, I think this creates a unified message for the readers on the basis of these tesserae in this mosaic text. So that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have questions or you would like to discuss this, then you can contact me on the address that you see here. And here are some references which I want to add to wrap up this presentation. Thank you very much. And I hope to see you at some other occasion, another live occasion. That would be really nice. Bye-bye.